14 years. That's how long Daniel and I have been married. Though sometimes it feels like a lifetime, and other times it feels like we barely know each other anymore. On paper, our life is perfect. 2 kids, a mortgage, soccer games on Saturdays, PTA meetings where everyone smiles politely, and those obligatory couples dinners where the air always seems thick with unspoken words. But perfection is just another word for illusion, isn't it? Beneath the surface of our picturesque suburban existence lies something far uglier, a slow decay that neither of us had the courage to address. It started small, almost imperceptible at first. Late at night, when the house was quiet except for the hum of the dishwasher in the background, I would hear him, Daniel, my husband of 14 years, talking softly under his breath. At first, I told myself it was work-related. He runs a tech company after all, and business never sleeps, as he liked to say. But then came the video calls, the late-night whispers, the way his voice softened when he thought I wasn't listening. Once, I asked him about it casually over coffee one morning, trying to sound nonchalant as if it didn't matter. He dismissed me with a wave of his hand, saying it was just a business partner. A partner. Even now, the word makes my stomach churn. But what truly shattered whatever fragile trust remained between us was the discovery of those texts. It happened by accident, one of those moments you wish you could erase from your memory forever. His phone lay on the kitchen counter, buzzing insistently. Thinking it might be an emergency involving the kids, I picked it up without hesitation. What I found instead made my blood run cold. Messages filled with longing, flirtation, promises of things I couldn't bear to imagine. My hands trembled so violently that I nearly dropped the phone. For a moment, I considered confronting him right then and there, demanding answers, forcing him to look me in the eye and explain himself. But fear gripped me, a paralyzing, suffocating fear. What if the truth was worse than my imagination? What if this was only the tip of the iceberg? So I stayed silent. I slid the phone back onto the counter, careful not to leave any trace of my intrusion, and retreated to the bathroom, where I locked the door behind me and sank to the floor. Tears streamed down my face, but they weren't tears of anger or betrayal, not yet. They were tears of despair, of feeling utterly invisible in the very marriage I had poured my heart and soul into. Over the years, I had become accustomed to the distance between us. The way he no longer reached for my hand when we watched TV together. The way his eyes skimmed past mine during conversations, as if searching for someone or something else. But this was different. This was proof that the man I loved, the man I had built a life with, had moved on emotionally long before I even realized he was gone. That night, as he slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, replaying every interaction we'd ever had in my mind. Was I blind? Naive? Had I missed the signs because I was too busy keeping up appearances, the perfectly trimmed lawn, the warm lighting, the family portraits that hung on our walls like trophies of a happiness we no longer felt? Or was it simpler than that? Was I simply too afraid to see the truth, too desperate to cling to the remnants of a love that had already slipped through my fingers? The days that followed were a blur of forced smiles and hollow laughter. I continued going through the motions, pretending everything was fine while inside I was unraveling. Every time Daniel's phone buzzed, my heart skipped a beat. Every glance he gave me felt loaded with secrets I couldn't bear to uncover. And yet, despite the weight crushing down on me, I said nothing. Silence became my shield, my prison, my punishment. Because deep down, I knew that once the silence broke, there would be no turning back. And maybe, just maybe, I wasn't ready to face what lay beyond. It all started innocently enough, or so I told myself, when Maya showed up at our doorstep with a duffel bag slung over her shoulder and tears still fresh in her eyes. She had just gone through what she called the breakup of the century, though I suspected it was less about grand gestures and more about quiet betrayals. Her fiance of 2 years, someone she'd imagined building an entire life with, had simply vanished one day without explanation. No calls, no texts, no closure. Just silence. And while I wanted to be the strong older sister, the one who could offer comfort and stability, I couldn't ignore the gnawing unease that settled in my chest the moment she stepped into our home. At first, everything seemed normal. Maya took up residence in the guest room, filling the space with her signature warmth, scented candles, stacks of books she'd brought from her apartment, and soft blankets draped carelessly over the armchair. She laughed loudly at TikTok videos late at night, cooked elaborate breakfasts even though no one asked, and played endless board games with the kids. To anyone watching, she appeared to be the same free-spirited younger sister I'd always known, the one who danced barefoot in the rain and wore mismatched earrings because they made her happy. But beneath that surface-level brightness, something darker lingered. Something neither of us spoke about. The first sign came on a Tuesday evening, about 3 weeks after she moved in. I was sitting at the kitchen island scrolling through emails when Daniel walked in, his phone buzzing incessantly in his pocket. He glanced at the screen briefly before slipping it back into his jeans, but not before Maya caught a glimpse of it too. Her expression shifted for only a fraction of a second, a flicker of confusion, then discomfort, but it was enough to make me pause. Later that night, as we were folding laundry together in the living room, I noticed her fidgeting with the hem of her sweater, her movements restless and distracted. "What's wrong?" I asked casually, trying to mask my growing suspicion. "Nothing," she replied quickly, almost too quickly. "Just tired, I guess." But I didn't believe her. Not really, because deep down, I already knew what she wasn't saying. The next morning, while Daniel was out running errands and the kids were at school, I found her in the guest room staring blankly at her laptop. When I knocked lightly on the doorframe, she startled, slamming the lid shut with such force that the sound echoed through the house. "You okay?" I pressed, stepping closer. She hesitated, her hands trembling slightly as she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. I saw something," she admitted finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "On Daniel's phone? Last night?" My heart sank. I didn't need her to elaborate. I already knew exactly what she meant. Those same flirtatious messages I discovered months ago, the ones I'd chosen to ignore, were now haunting us both. Only this time, it wasn't just me bearing the weight of betrayal. This time, Maya was caught in the crossfire too. "I didn't want to say anything," she continued, her voice cracking under the strain of unshed tears. "I thought maybe I misread it, or maybe it's nothing." But then, she trailed off, shaking her head as if trying to dispel the thoughts swirling in her mind. "Then what?" I prompted gently, though every fiber of my being braced for the answer. "He looks at me differently," she blurted out suddenly, her cheeks flushing with shame. "Not always, but sometimes. Like he's studying me. Like he sees something he wants." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. For weeks, I convinced myself that the subtle shifts in Daniel's behavior were harmless, that his lingering glances and overly friendly demeanor were merely attempts to make Maya feel welcome. But hearing it from her lips stripped away any lingering denial. It wasn't harmless. It never had been. That night, as we sat around the dinner table pretending everything was fine, I couldn't stop replaying Maya's confession in my head. Every time Daniel leaned across the table to refill her glass, every time he laughed a little too loudly at her jokes, every time their hands accidentally brushed, it felt like confirmation of something I desperately tried to deny. My own husband, the man I'd pledged my life to, was crossing boundaries I hadn't even realized existed. And worse, I was powerless to stop him. Maya, however, handled it differently. Where I retreated into silence, she began to push back, not overtly, but in small, almost imperceptible ways. She stopped wearing her usual cozy tank tops around the house, opting instead for oversized sweatshirts that concealed her figure. She avoided sitting next to him on the couch during movie nights, claiming the armchair was campfire. And whenever he offered to help her with something, whether it was carrying groceries or fixing a loose cabinet hinge, she politely declined, citing independence or self-reliance. Still, despite her efforts to create distance, the tension between them grew palpable. One afternoon, while I was upstairs helping the kids with homework, I heard raised voices coming from the kitchen. By the time I rushed downstairs, the argument had dissolved into awkward silence, but the air was thick with unspoken accusations. Maya stood near the sink, her arms crossed tightly over her chest, while Daniel leaned against the counter, his jaw clenched in frustration. "Everything okay?" I asked cautiously, looking between them. "Fine," Daniel muttered, brushing past me without meeting my gaze. Maya forced a smile, though it didn't reach her eyes. "Yeah, everything's fine." But it wasn't. Nothing was fine anymore. And as I watched Maya retreat to the guest room, her shoulders hunched in defeat, I realized the truth. My marriage wasn't just crumbling, it was poisoning everything it touched, including the bond I cherish most, my relationship with my sister. The house was quiet, too quiet. It was one of those nights where the silence felt alive, pressing against my ears like a weight I couldn't shake off. The kids were asleep upstairs, their soft breathing audible through the baby monitor on the kitchen counter. Daniel had been unusually attentive that evening, bringing me a glass of wine after dinner and brushing his hand lightly against mine as he passed. For a moment, it almost felt normal, like the old days when we still touched without thinking, when his presence didn't feel like an intrusion. But now, every gesture carried layers I wasn't sure I wanted to unravel. I had gone to bed early, claiming exhaustion, though sleep eluded me entirely. My mind raced with fragmented thoughts, Maya's laughter echoing from earlier that day, the way Daniel smiled at her during dinner, how she leaned into his jokes as if they shared some secret language I no longer understood. Around midnight, unable to bear the restless churn of my thoughts any longer, I slipped out of bed, careful not to wake Daniel. Maybe a glass of water would help calm the storm inside me, or so I told myself. When I reached the kitchen, the sight before me froze me in place. There they were, Maya and Daniel, standing far too close for comfort near the stove. He was whispering something, his voice low and intimate, while Maya nodded, her face tilted slightly toward him. Her arms were crossed tightly over her chest, but there was no mistaking the familiarity in their stance, the kind that develops between people who've spent hours talking, laughing, sharing pieces of themselves you never realized were missing. My breath caught in my throat, sharp and painful, like shards of glass slicing through me. They hadn't noticed me yet. The dim light from the refrigerator cast long shadows across the room, hiding me in its darkness. Part of me wanted to step forward, to demand answers, to scream until the walls shook. But another part, a darker, weaker part, held me rooted to the spot. What would I say? How could I accuse them of something I couldn't even name? Daniel reached out then, placing a hand on Maya's shoulder. It was such a simple gesture, one I might have dismissed under different circumstances. But here, in this moment, it felt monumental, loaded with meaning I couldn't ignore. Maya flinched slightly, but didn't pull away. Instead, she looked up at him, her expression unreadable, and said something in return. I couldn't hear the words, but the tone was unmistakable, soft, hesitant, tinged with something that made my stomach twist. It wasn't just the physical proximity that unsettled me, it was everything leading up to it. Over the past few weeks, Maya and Daniel had grown closer in ways that seemed innocent at first. She started joining him for morning coffee, sitting across from him at the table while I busied myself with laundry or school lunches. At first, I convinced myself it was harmless, even sweet. After all, Maya was hurting and Daniel was simply being supportive. Right? But then came the lingering glances, the inside jokes I wasn't privy to, the way Maya's laughter filled the house more than mine ever did anymore. By the time I retreated back to my bedroom, my hands were trembling and my heart pounded so loudly I feared Daniel would hear it. I crawled back under the covers, staring at the ceiling as tears blurred my vision. Betrayal isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it creeps in quietly, disguised as kindness or camaraderie. And maybe that's what made it hurt even more, the realization that Maya, my own sister, was slipping away from me, not because of anger or resentment, but because someone else was giving her what I couldn't: attention, validation, connection. The next morning, I watched them interact over breakfast, searching for signs of guilt or discomfort. But there was none. Maya hummed softly as she flipped pancakes, and Daniel complimented her cooking, his smile warm and genuine. To anyone else, it would have looked like a perfectly ordinary family scene. To me, it felt like a betrayal unfolding in slow motion. The conversation had been simmering for days, hovering between us like a storm cloud that refused to break. Daniel's words from the beach house still echoed in my mind, his calm, deliberate tone as he spoke about connection and trust, as if he were pitching some utopian dream rather than dismantling everything I thought our marriage stood for. But it wasn't until we returned home, back in the suffocating familiarity of our suburban life, that he truly turned the screws. It was late one evening, after the kids had gone to bed, when he cornered me in the kitchen. The dishwasher hummed softly in the background, its mechanical rhythm almost mocking in its steadiness. He leaned against the counter, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable but somehow calculated. "We need to think about what's best for the family," he began, his voice low but firm. My stomach twisted at the word family. What did that even mean anymore? To him, it seemed to be a bargaining chip, a way to manipulate me into agreeing to something unthinkable. "This isn't just about us," he continued, his gaze piercing through me. "It's about giving the kids stability, showing them what love looks like when it evolves. If we do this, if we open ourselves up to something deeper, it could save us. Don't you see that?" I stared at him, my hands gripping the edge of the sink so tightly my knuckles turned white. Save us? Was he serious? His logic was warped, twisted into shapes I couldn't comprehend. And then came the blow, the one that made my blood run cold. "You know how fragile things are with the kids," he said, his tone softening dangerously, like a predator feigning concern. "They've already seen cracks in us. Do you really want them growing up in a broken home? Because that's where we're headed if we don't fix this now." My breath hitched, sharp and painful, like a shard of glass slicing through my chest. He was using them, our children, as leverage, dangling their happiness and security over my head like a guillotine. How dare he? How could he weaponize their innocence, their trust, against me? But worse than his manipulation was my own reaction. I felt it, the panic rising in my throat, choking me. What if he was right? What if saying no would shatter whatever fragile facade of normalcy we'd managed to maintain? The thought of losing them, of watching our family dissolve into chaos, was paralyzing. "I'm not asking you to do this for me," he pressed on, stepping closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'm asking you to do it for them. For all of us. This is how we keep everything together. This is how we stay perfect." Perfect. The word hit me like a slap across the face. Perfect was a lie, a mirage we'd been chasing for years while drowning in silence and resentment. And yet, standing there under his unwavering gaze, I couldn't find the strength to fight back. My mind raced, thoughts colliding in a chaotic swirl. What kind of mother would I be if I refused? Would they blame me for the unraveling? Would they hate me for failing to hold us together? The questions looped endlessly, each one tightening the invisible noose around my neck. And then there was Maya, or rather, the ghost of her presence that lingered in every corner of the house. Her absence weighed heavily, a constant reminder of what I had allowed to happen. Could I endure another betrayal, another loss? The thought of bringing her into this nightmare, not as an unwilling participant, but as a willing accomplice, made my skin crawl. Yet Daniel's conviction was relentless, his certainty unnerving. He believed in this madness, in the warped vision of love he was selling. And part of me, the weakest, most desperate part, wondered if maybe, just maybe, he was onto something. But deep down, beneath the fear and confusion, I knew the truth. This wasn't about saving our family. It wasn't about connection or trust or any of the beautiful lies he spun so effortlessly. It was about control, about bending me to his will, forcing me to sacrifice pieces of myself until there was nothing left. And as I stood there, trembling and silent, I realized something even more terrifying. I might actually say yes. The beach house was supposed to be an escape, a sanctuary where the three of us could reconnect, as Daniel had so smoothly put it. But from the moment we stepped inside, I felt the walls closing in. The air smelled like salt and sunlight, but beneath that fresh ocean breeze lingered something darker, heavier, a tension I couldn't quite name yet, but knew instinctively would explode before the weekend ended. Friday night passed in a blur of wine, laughter, and forced smiles. Maya twirled barefoot on the patio under the orange glow of sunset, her sundress fluttering around her legs like she hadn't a care in the world. And Daniel watched her, not subtly, not casually, but with a gaze so intense it made my skin crawl. By Saturday afternoon, the cracks were beginning to show. Daniel suggested another round of drinks by the pool while Maya lounged nearby, scrolling through her phone. At first, everything seemed normal, or as normal as this twisted charade could be. But then Maya froze, her fingers hovering over the screen. She glanced up at Daniel, her expression unreadable but tinged with something sharp anger. Betrayal? Hurt? What's wrong? Daniel asked, his voice too casual, too practiced. He leaned closer to her, his hand brushing against hers in what might have looked like concern to anyone else, but felt predatory to me. Nothing, Maya muttered quickly, shoving her phone into her bag. But I saw the flash of something on her screen before she tucked it away, a photo. A woman, draped over Daniel's shoulder, laughing into the camera. My stomach churned. Was this why he'd wanted this trip? To distract us from the truth? Or worse, to make sure we didn't ask questions? That evening, after dinner, things took a darker turn. Maya excused herself to go upstairs, claiming she needed some air. Daniel followed moments later, muttering something about checking on her. I stayed behind, pretending to clear the table, but my ears strained toward the staircase, listening for their voices. They weren't loud, but they didn't need to be. Their words carried down the narrow hallway like whispers meant to haunt me. I don't understand, Maya said, her voice trembling. Who is she? It's nothing, Daniel replied, his tone clipped. Just work stuff? Work stuff? Maya snapped, her voice rising slightly. You're telling me this is professional? Because it doesn't look very professional. There was a pause, heavy and suffocating. I gripped the edge of the counter, my knuckles white, my heart pounding in my chest. What was happening upstairs? What was Daniel saying to her? This isn't about her, Daniel finally said, his voice softer now, almost coaxing. It's about us. about trust. You know how much I care about you? About both of you? Both of them. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. How dare he say that? How dare he twist love into something so toxic, so manipulative? And yet, part of me wondered if Maya believed him, if she thought there was any truth in his lies. I heard footsteps approaching, and I scrambled to busy myself with the dishes, splashing water onto the counter in my haste. When Daniel reappeared, his expression was calm, almost serene, as though nothing had happened. But Maya trailed behind him, her face pale, her arms wrapped tightly around herself like she was trying to hold herself together. "You okay?" I asked softly, glancing between them. "Fine," Maya said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Just tired." But she wasn't fine. None of us were. The rest of the night unfolded in strained silence, broken only by the occasional clink of glasses or the distant crash of waves against the shore. Later, when everyone had retired to their rooms, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying their conversation over and over in my mind. Who was the woman in the photo? What had Daniel done? And most importantly, what had Maya seen that I hadn't? The night unraveled like a thread pulled too tightly, unraveling everything it touched. After Maya bolted upstairs and locked herself in the guest bathroom, I sat frozen on the couch, my hands clutching the edge of the cushion so hard that my knuckles turned white. Daniel's calm demeanor, the way he acted as though nothing catastrophic had just occurred, only deepened the chasm inside me. He muttered something about giving her space, but his words felt hollow, like they were spoken by someone who didn't truly understand the gravity of what had transpired. Meanwhile, Maya's sobs filtered faintly through the door, each one piercing my chest like shards of glass. When the house finally fell silent hours later, I convinced myself she'd cried herself to sleep. But when morning came, the emptiness hit me before I even opened my eyes. The bed beside me was cold. Daniel had already risen. A sense of dread pooled in my stomach as I padded downstairs, hoping against hope that Maya might still be here. Instead, I found her room empty, her bag gone, the bed neatly made, as if erasing any trace of her presence. On the bedside table lay an envelope, my name scrawled across it in her familiar handwriting. My breath hitched as I picked it up, my fingers trembling. Inside was a letter, not angry, not accusatory, but filled with a sorrow so profound it nearly took my knees out from under me. "I thought I could trust you," she wrote. "You were supposed to protect me, not stand silently while I was pushed into something I couldn't bear. I don't know who either of you are anymore." Each word landed like a blow, leaving bruises I knew would never fade. She ended with a plea. "Please don't come looking for me. I need time to figure out how to forgive, or if I even can." Panic surged through me as I realized she must have left in the early hours, long before sunrise. I rushed to the window, scanning the driveway for her car, but it was already gone. That's when I noticed it, the faint skid marks near the curb, dark against the pale pavement. My heart leapt into my throat. Had she been in an accident? I grabbed my phone and dialed her number, but it went straight to voicemail. Desperation clawed at me as I called again and again, each unanswered ring amplifying my terror. Finally, unable to bear the uncertainty, I got into my own car and drove toward the highway, retracing what I imagined might have been her route. About 10 minutes away, I spotted a crumpled guardrail along the shoulder, bits of shattered taillight glinting in the sunlight. My pulse thundered in my ears as I pulled over, stumbling out of the car. There, parked haphazardly on the side of the road, was Maya's vehicle. Its front bumper was dented, the hood slightly askew, steam rising from the engine. And there she was, sitting slumped behind the wheel, her face buried in her hands. "Maya," I shouted, running toward her. She startled at the sound of my voice, her head snapping up. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her expression raw with exhaustion and despair. When she saw me, she flinched, pulling away instinctively as I reached for the car door. "Don't," she whispered hoarsely. "Just don't." "I thought you were hurt," I said, my voice cracking. "What happened?" She let out a bitter laugh, shaking her head. "I almost crashed. Lost control coming around the bend. Guess I wasn't paying attention." Her tone was flat, devoid of emotion, but the tremor in her hands betrayed the storm raging beneath the surface. I crouched beside the car, trying to meet her gaze. "You can't leave like this. Not like this. Let's talk. Please." "There's nothing left to say," she replied, her voice barely audible. "You chose him. Him and whatever twisted fantasy he sold you. You didn't choose me." Her words gutted me, stripping away whatever defenses I'd clung to. I wanted to explain, to apologize, to beg for forgiveness, but the truth was, she was right. In that moment, I hated myself more than she ever could. Before I could respond, she started the engine, the car sputtering back to life. "Stay away from me," she said, her voice firm despite the tears streaming down her face. Then she sped off, leaving me standing alone on the side of the road, my reflection distorted in the rearview mirror of her retreating car. As I watched her disappear, I realized the damage wasn't just external, it lived within me now, a fracture I doubted would ever heal. The days that followed Maya's departure were a blur of suffocating silence and unanswered questions. The house, once filled with her laughter and warmth, now felt like an empty shell, a hollow replica of the life we had tried so desperately to hold together. But it wasn't just me who noticed her absence. The kids, too, began to sense something was off. At first, their curiosity seemed innocent enough, a casual question here or there about when Aunt Maya would visit again. But as weeks turned into months, their inquiries grew sharper, more persistent. "Why doesn't Aunt Maya call us anymore?" My youngest asked one evening during dinner, his voice tinged with confusion and hurt. I froze, fork halfway to my mouth, unsure how to respond without revealing too much or worse, lying outright. Daniel didn't flinch. He simply continued eating, chewing methodically as though the conversation around him had dissolved into static noise. Forcing a brittle smile, I muttered something vague about how grown-ups sometimes need space. It was a weak excuse, even to my own ears, but it was all I could muster in the moment. After dinner, while the kids played upstairs, Daniel cornered me in the kitchen. His expression was calm, almost eerily composed, but his words carried a weight that made my stomach churn. "You can't tell them," he said firmly, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "If you say anything at all, I'll file for divorce before you can blink." His threat hung in the air between us, heavy and unyielding. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped the edge of the counter, trying to steady myself. Divorce. The word echoed in my mind, sharp and jagged, cutting through whatever fragile resolve I'd managed to piece together. How could I explain to our children what had happened without destroying the illusion of normalcy they clung to? And yet, keeping silent felt like compounding the betrayal, not just to Maya, but to the kids who deserved honesty, however painful it might be. But the truth was, I didn't trust myself to speak. Every time I opened my mouth, the memories came flooding back, the look on Maya's face as she bolted from the room, the way she refused to meet my eyes afterward, the sound of her car speeding away in the early morning light. What could I possibly say to make any of this better? Instead, I nodded mutely, swallowing the lump in my throat as Daniel walked away, satisfied that he'd secured my compliance, at least for now. What I didn't anticipate, however, was the discovery that shattered whatever tenuous piece I'd been clinging to. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered into Daniel's home office under the pretense of looking for a book. The room was dimly lit, the faint glow of his laptop screen casting shadows across the desk. As I approached, I noticed the chat window open a string of messages exchanged between him and someone whose name sent a cold shiver down my spine. Maya. My breath hitched as I read through their conversation, each line piercing deeper than the last. They weren't discussing logistics or apologies, they were planning something. A meeting? A reunion? I couldn't tell exactly, but the intimacy in their exchanges left no room for doubt. He still cared about her. Maybe he always had. And worse, she hadn't completely shut him out either. Their dialogue was cryptic yet charged with emotion, a tangled web of longing and regret that made my chest tighten with every word. I wanted to confront him, to demand answers, to scream until the walls shook, but instead, I backed away quietly, closing the laptop lid with trembling hands. That night, I lay awake in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying the messages in my mind. Was this why he stayed? Not because he loved me, not because he believed in our marriage, but because Maya was still part of his equation. The thought made me physically ill, a wave of nausea washing over me as I realized the depth of my own entrapment. And then there were the nights when the guilt became unbearable, the kind of guilt that seeps into your bones, gnawing at you until you feel raw and exposed. I started journaling again, pouring my thoughts onto paper in frantic scribbles, hoping to exorcise some of the demons haunting me. But even writing couldn't dull the ache. Each sentence I penned felt like another layer of self-betrayal, another reminder of how far I'd fallen from the person I used to be. The hardest part wasn't the isolation, it was the realization that I had allowed it to happen. I had stood by silently as my husband dismantled everything I held dear, as my sister walked out of my life forever. And now, with the kids growing increasingly suspicious and Daniel tightening his grip on the narrative, I felt trapped in a prison of my own making. There was no escape, no redemption, only the endless echo of choices I couldn't take back. Years passed, but the weight of what happened never truly lifted. It lingered in the corners of my mind, a shadow that stretched long and dark over everything I did. The house we once shared, Daniel, Maya, and I had become a monument to betrayal, its walls echoing with memories I couldn't escape no matter how far I moved away. Even after Daniel and I separated, a quiet, amicable split devoid of any real closure, the past refused to stay buried. Every time I drove past our old neighborhood, my chest tightened as though an invisible hand were squeezing it. And there, standing on the sidewalk near the house, was always her, or at least someone who looked like her. Maya's absence haunted me more than her presence ever could. Her laughter, her warmth, her carefree spirit, all of it had been replaced by silence so profound it felt like a living thing, breathing down my neck wherever I went. But worse than the silence was the guilt. It wasn't just about losing my sister. It was about knowing I had let her walk away without fighting for her. I didn't chase her when she left that morning. I didn't call after she ignored my texts. I simply let her go. And now, every street lamp flickering in the twilight seemed to cast her silhouette, reminding me of what I'd lost. The day I saw her again was entirely unexpected. It wasn't some grand reunion or orchestrated moment. It was mundane, almost painfully ordinary. I was grocery shopping at the small market downtown, grabbing ingredients for dinner when I turned into the produce aisle and froze. There she was, older, thinner, her hair shorter, but still framing her face in that effortlessly radiant way. For a moment, I thought I was imagining her, projecting my guilt onto a stranger. But then she looked up, and our eyes met across the bins of apples and oranges. Time stopped. "Maya," I whispered, the word barely audible even to myself. My cart slipped from my grip, rolling slightly forward before coming to a halt. She flinched, startled, her basket of vegetables nearly toppling over. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. Then slowly, she set her basket down and took a step toward me. "You're real," she said finally, her voice trembling. "I thought I imagined you." "So did I admitted, tears already spilling down my cheeks. "You look good?" She gave a small, sad laugh, shaking her head. "Do I? Because I don't feel it." We stood there in the middle of the store, surrounded by strangers picking through lettuce and comparing prices, yet completely isolated in our own world. Neither of us knew where to start, or if we should start at all. The years between us weren't just numbers. They were walls built brick by brick with every unanswered text, every unspoken apology, every missed opportunity to make things right. "I'm sorry," I blurted out, the words tumbling out before I could stop them. "I'm so sorry, Maya. For everything. For not stopping him. For letting you leave. For not being enough." Her expression softened, that there was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't been there before, a weariness that spoke of battles fought and scars earned. "I wanted to hate you," she confessed quietly. "For a long time, I told myself I did. But hatred takes energy, and I was too tired to keep it alive." "What about forgiveness?" I asked, my voice breaking. "Is that something I can ask for?" She hesitated, looking away for a moment before meeting my gaze again. "Forgiveness isn't mine to give," she said. "Not fully. You hurt me, yes, but you hurt yourself too. And maybe that's the hardest part. You'll carry this with you forever." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut, but they also carried a strange sense of relief. For years, I'd carried the burden of believing I deserved nothing less than outright rejection. Hearing her acknowledge my pain even indirectly felt like a lifeline thrown into the abyss I'd been drowning in. We talked for hours that day, sitting in a nearby cafe, sipping lukewarm coffee and piecing together fragments of the lives we'd lived apart. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of tension, pauses filled with unspoken resentment, flashes of anger that bubbled to the surface despite our best efforts to suppress them. But beneath it all was something fragile yet undeniable, a tentative bridge spanning the chasm between us. By the end of the conversation, we both cried, not because we'd found resolution, but because we realized resolution might never come. Some wounds don't heal, they scar. And while those scars may fade with time, they never disappear entirely. As I watched Maya walk away again, this time under vastly different circumstances, I understood one thing with crystalline clarity: forgiveness doesn't erase the past. It simply allows you to carry it differently,